You're becoming a distraction, Eleanor. Those words from the choir director, David, still echo in my ears as I sit here alone on the church pew. My hands tremble over the worn Bible that once belonged to my mother. I can feel the other choir members' eyes slipping away whenever I try to meet their gaze. The silence is deafening in a place that used to be my sanctuary. How could a sacred space turn so cold in just 7 days? My dear friends, thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to listen to my story today. This channel is still very new, and every single subscriber means the world to me, like a breath of fresh air giving life to this journey. If my story touches you, please consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you don't mind, share in the comments where you're watching from. Let's build a little community of hearts connected by faith and honesty. I remember that morning clearly. The way the soft light filtered through the lace curtains in my kitchen, casting gentle patterns across the worn wooden table. The faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint scent of old hymnals stacked neatly on the windowsill. Outside, the old church bell told its steady, familiar rhythm, marking the hour. It was the kind of morning that felt like a warm embrace, the kind that held promises of comfort and community, before everything began to unravel. My name is Eleanor Jameson. I'm 69 years old now, though most days I feel both the weight and the grace of every year written into my bones. I've been a member of the First Presbyterian Church of Oak Ridge for over 4 decades, a lifetime really. This church, these people, they're woven into the very fabric of who I am. My late husband, Richard, and I raised our children here. We found solace in this sanctuary when life was good, and also when it was hard. This place was more than just a building, it was family. That morning, like many others, I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. The warmth seeped into my fingers, grounding me as the church bells chimed again, their sound drifting through the open window. I could hear Mrs. Harper down the street, sweeping her porch, and the distant laughter of children playing near the park. It was peaceful, a reminder of the gentle rhythms that community life can bring. But beneath the calm, a quiet tension had been growing for months. Our church was struggling. I had known this from whispered conversations in the hallways, from the worried glances Pastor Wilson cast during sermons. The truth was unavoidable. The church was drowning in debt. I tried not to dwell too much on the numbers, on the cold reality that the roof needed urgent repairs, that the heating system had broken down just before winter's first frost, or that there was a mortgage, a heavy one, that had quietly accumulated over the years. I remember sitting through that congregation meeting nearly 3 months ago. The air was thick with unease. The pews were filled with familiar faces, some etched with worry, others masking their fear with hopeful smiles. When the pastor spoke, his voice was steady but heavy with burden. "We are facing a crisis," he said softly. "The debt is nearly $500,000. We must consider every option." Someone in the back whispered, "Maybe it's God's will for us to close our doors." The room fell silent. My heart sank. I looked around at the faces of friends and neighbors, the people I had shared baptisms, weddings, funerals with, and I knew I couldn't let this place slip away. Not without trying everything I could. That afternoon, I found myself standing outside the pastor's office. The door was slightly ajar, and I hesitated for a moment before knocking gently. When he looked up, there was surprise in his eyes. "I want to help," I said simply. "I want to pay off the church's debt." His eyebrows rose behind the thin frames of his glasses. "Eleanor, that's extraordinary." I smiled, feeling a calm resolve settle over me. Richard always said we needed a rainy day fund. After he passed last year, I inherited enough to help. This church is my family. It's where I've found hope, and I want to make sure others can find it too. He reached across the desk and took my hands in his, a quiet thankfulness shining in his gaze. "Are you sure? It's a considerable sum." I nodded. "I'm almost 70. My children are grown and independent. What good is money if it just sits in the bank? That evening, as I sat alone in the quiet of my living room, I found strength in the thought that my gift could keep this sanctuary alive. Singing in the choir every Sunday was my joy, the one thread of light that had woven itself into my grief since Richard's passing. The music, the harmony, it was where my soul felt at home. Days passed and I kept my promise. Quietly, without fanfare, the check was written and signed. At church the following Sunday, the pastor made a brief announcement. A thank you to an anonymous donor who had covered the debt. I chose to remain hidden in the shadows of gratitude because, as my mother used to say, true charity needs no applause. Life seemed to return to normal, or at least it did for a few days. Then came the rehearsal. I remember walking into the choir loft that Wednesday evening, the late afternoon sun casting golden hues through the stained glass. The familiar scent of wood polish and sheet music filled the air. The other members greeted me with polite smiles, but there was a subtle change in the atmosphere, a tension I hadn't noticed before. David Mercer, our new choir director, stood at the podium. He had been with us for just 6 months, a man with precise gestures and a sharp, calculated gaze. His green eyes scanned the room as he prepared to lead. When I started singing, he stopped the music abruptly. "Eleanor," he said, his voice calm but firm, "could you sing a little softer? Your voice is standing out." I blinked, surprised. In all my years, I'd never once been asked to soften my tone. "I'm sorry, David. I'll try." But as rehearsals went on, the comments became more frequent, more pointed. "Adjust your pitch. Blend more. Don't hold the note so long." Each correction felt like a small cut, but I accepted them quietly. I told myself it was about harmony, about the choir's sound, not about me. Until last night. After rehearsal, David asked to speak with me privately. We stepped into the hallway, the quiet hum of the church settling around us. "Eleanor," he said, "I think it's best if you take a break from the choir for a while." "A break?" I echoed, my voice barely steady. "Yes. Your voice is distracting the other members." I felt my breath catch. I've been here longer than anyone. How can my voice suddenly be a problem? He reached out, placing a hand on my shoulder in a gesture that felt more dismissive than comforting. "We're moving in a new direction. A different sound. For the future of the church." I looked back toward the loft where the others were packing up their music stands. Some avoided my gaze. Others looked away with what I thought was pity. Felt like a betrayal. "Is this about my age?" I asked quietly. "Of course not," he replied swiftly. "It's just about the music." But I knew better. That morning, I arrived early at church and overheard a conversation behind the council room door. The door was ajar, voices drifting out. "We can't just push her aside," Pastor Wilson said, his tone hesitant. "Eleanor gave $500,000 to save this church." "We're grateful," David answered smoothly. "But my wife, Susan, is ready to step into that solo role. Everyone agrees her voice is exactly what we need to attract younger members." I swallowed hard, my heart breaking. This is about power, I thought. About connections. About replacing me with Susan Mercer. I stepped away quietly, the weight of the truth crushing me. Now here I am, sitting alone on this church pew. My hands tremble over my mother's Bible. The choir will begin soon, but my place will be empty, or worse, taken. My grandson, Timothy, sits beside me, his young hand gripping mine. "Grandma, you don't have to stay. We can find another church." I look at him, his eyes so much like Richard's, filled with kindness and determination. "No, dear," I say softly. "This is my church. I'm not going anywhere." The organ begins to play. The choir walks in, led by David, with Susan in the red soloist's robe I wore for so many years. When everyone is seated, I stand. Timothy tries to stop me, but I shake my head. I walk to the pulpit, where Pastor Wilson waits, surprised. Excuse me, Pastor. I think we have much to discuss as a congregation. But first, let us sing our opening hymn, led by Eleanor Jameson, as she has faithfully done for so many years. As I walk back toward the choir loft, passing David and his wife, I realize what Richard always said. True faith isn't about what you say, but what you do when no one is watching. And sometimes even more importantly, it's about what you say when everyone is listening. That morning, the church was unusually quiet when I arrived. The sun was still low, painting soft golden hues through the tall, stained glass windows that lined the sanctuary. The scent of polished wood and old hymnals mingled in the air, comforting and familiar, or so I thought. The pews, usually filled with chatter and laughter, sat empty and cold, as if holding their breath, waiting. I clutched my mother's worn Bible tightly in my hands, feeling the leather cover soft against my palms, grounding me in a world that suddenly felt uncertain. I had been here for 40 years, and in all that time, this place had been a refuge, a place of unwavering faith and community. But today, something felt different, like a shadow had been cast over the light I had always known. As I stepped inside, the wooden floor creaked beneath my sensible shoes, the sound echoing in the vastness. My heart thudded unevenly, a strange mix of anticipation and unease twisting in my chest. I made my way quietly toward the choir loft, my usual sanctuary during rehearsals and Sunday services. The air up there was cooler, the scent of old music sheets and polished brass instruments wrapping around me like an old friend's embrace. I could already hear faint voices before I even reached the top of the steps, the low murmur of conversation, hushed but urgent. My steps slowed, a knot tightening in my stomach. Peering around the corner, I saw David Mercer, our choir director, speaking with Pastor Wilson and a few other church leaders. Their faces were serious, voices low but intense. I recognized that familiar curve of tension in the pastor's brow, the same look I'd seen months ago when he first revealed the church's staggering debt. But this time it was different. He looked reluctant, almost conflicted. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the Bible tighter. The cold from the wooden railing seeped into my fingers. My mind raced. What could they be talking about with such urgency? Was it about the upcoming service? The choir's new direction? Or something else? Something I dreaded even to imagine? I took a small step forward, then stopped. I didn't want to intrude, but I couldn't help myself. The door to the council room was ajar, and through the narrow gap, I caught fragments of conversation. "We can't just sideline her like this," Pastor Wilson said softly but firmly, his voice heavy with concern. "Eleanor gave $500,000 to save this church. She deserves respect." David's voice was cool, deliberate, almost clinical. "We're grateful, Reverend. Truly. But my wife, Susan, is ready to take on the soloist role. Her voice has that vibrancy we need. We need to think about attracting younger members, about the future." The pastor sighed, a long, weary sound. "I understand, David. But Eleanor has been a pillar here for 40 years. This isn't just about music. It's about community, faith, and honoring those who have given so much." David's response was firm, unyielding. "We have to move forward. This isn't personal. It's about what's best for the church." I felt my heart shatter into quiet, sharp pieces. The warmth I had felt just moments before drained away, replaced by a cold, hollow ache. My breath hitched, my throat tightening as if someone had wrapped an invisible cord around it. My legs felt heavy, like I was sinking into the wooden floor. I stepped back silently, my hands now clammy, fingers clutching the Bible so tightly the edges dug into my skin. My chest heaved, shallow breaths barely filling my lungs. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady the storm inside me. How could they be talking about me like this? Like I was nothing more than a shadow to sweep away? The weight of the secret I had carried for weeks, the check I'd quietly written to save this church, felt suddenly like a cruel joke. I had given everything to keep this sanctuary alive. to protect a community I loved with all my heart. And yet here I was being quietly erased. As I descended the stairs, the faces of the choir members flashed in my mind, their smiles, their nods of encouragement over the years. Had they all felt this way? Was I becoming invisible to them too? The thought made the tears prick at my eyes, but I blinked them away. I had never been one to show weakness in public. Not here. Not now. Later that day, I received the message directly. David asked me to meet him after rehearsal, his tone polite but distant. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten again as I walked toward the church that evening, the fading daylight stretching long shadows across the parking lot. Each step felt heavier than the last. When I entered the choir loft, the familiar scent of varnished wood and music sheets did little to calm me. David was already there, standing with his arms folded, his gaze distant but fixed on me. I could see the faint crease between his brows, the way his lips pressed into a thin line. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low but steady, "we've been reviewing the choir's direction, and I think it's best if you take some time off." The words hit me like a sudden thunderclap. My chest tightened and my hands curled into fists, nails biting into my palms. "Time off," I whispered, disbelief making my voice brittle. He nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Your voice is becoming a distraction to the rest of the choir." I fought to keep my voice from breaking. "A distraction? I've sung here longer than anyone. I've dedicated my life to this church, to this choir." "I know," he said quickly, almost apologetically, "but we're moving toward a new sound. A younger sound. For the church's future." I shook my head slowly, bitterness rising. "Is this about my age? Because that's what it sounds like." David looked away, silent. I could feel the eyes of the other choir members on me, some shifting uncomfortably, others avoiding my gaze altogether. The loft, once a place of harmony and joy, suddenly felt cold and isolating. My breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat growing. I wanted to scream, to demand justice, but the words stuck, tangled in the rawness of my hurt. Instead, I just nodded. "I understand." But inside I was shattered. That night, as I sat alone in my quiet home, the weight of the day pressed down on me. I traced the outline of the pearl brooch my mother had given me, the same one I wore every Sunday. It felt like a talisman, a fragile link to strength and dignity. I thought of Richard, of his steady hands and unwavering faith. I thought of the promises we had made to each other, to always stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. And I realized then that this was my moment, my time to choose. To walk away quietly, to disappear into the shadows of forgotten service, or to stand voice strong and clear, even if it meant facing rejection and pain. The choice felt monumental. I felt my hands grow cold, my breath shallow, but my heart beat steady beneath the storm. When the morning light crept through my kitchen window the next day, I knew what I would do. I would not be silenced. This church, this community was my family. And family fought for love, for respect, for truth. No matter the cost. The church felt heavier that morning, as though the very walls were burdened with unspoken words and unseen fractures. I arrived early, hoping for a moment of quiet before the day's service, some solace in the stillness, but instead, the silence pressed in on me, thick and uneasy. The familiar scent of old wood and faint traces of incense mingled with the coldness in the air. It was as if the sanctuary itself was holding its breath. I clutched my mother's Bible tighter, the leather worn smooth from years of prayer and comfort. It was a touchstone, a piece of my past that reminded me who I was before all this confusion, before the whispers and shifting glances. The pews, usually a place of refuge, now seemed like the stage of a play I was no longer welcome to perform in. My footsteps echoed softly as I made my way to the choir loft, each step a reminder of the countless Sundays I had spent here, voice lifted in song. The sunlight filtering through the stained glass painted colors across the polished floor, dancing like memories that flickered but refused to die. I paused at the top of the stairs, catching sight of David. We began rehearsing the new hymn for Sunday's service. The music, once a balm to my spirit, now felt like a battleground. David's direction was precise, the tempo sharp, his corrections frequent and exacting. When my voice rose in the harmony, he stopped abruptly. "Eleanor," he said, deepening the sharpness in his tone, "let's hold back a little here. Blend with the others." I nodded, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. The words cut sharper than he could know. During a brief break, I sat quietly, fingers resting on the smooth wood of the music stand. Timothy, my grandson, slipped beside me, his presence a small comfort amid the tension. "You're doing fine, Grandma," he whispered, reaching to squeeze my hand lightly. "Don't listen to them." I smiled weakly, grateful for his steady gaze. "Thank you, dear. It means more than you know." Back in the circle of voices, I caught a glance from Susan, her eyes narrowing just a fraction before she quickly looked away. There was something in that look, a mixture of triumph and calculation that chilled me. I wondered what promises had been whispered in boardrooms and back hallways, what deals had been struck far from the pews and the prayers. Later, after rehearsal ended and the others had filed out, David asked to speak with me again. The words he chose were carefully measured, but the coldness beneath them was unmistakable. "Eleanor," he began, folding his arms, "I've been thinking about the choir's future. Susan is ready to take on the soloist's role. It's time for new voices to lead the congregation." I looked at him, searching for any hint of hesitation, remorse, anything that might soften the blow. But his eyes were steady, unwavering. "I've given my life to this choir," I said, voice trembling but firm. "I'm not ready to step aside for someone else, especially not when I've just saved this church." David's lips tightened. "This isn't personal. It's about the music, about what will bring the congregation together." His words felt like a betrayal, sharp and cold. I wanted to shout, to remind him that music was more than notes and rhythms. It was heart, history, and faith. Instead, I swallowed the pain and nodded, the taste of bitterness rising in my mouth. Walking home, the autumn wind bit through my coat, the crisp air a rude reminder of the chill settling into my bones. I thought about Richard, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands as he held mine. He had taught me about dignity, about standing firm when the world tried to push you down. I wasn't going to let this go quietly. The following day, I returned to the church early once more, hoping for a moment alone before the storm. The quiet was broken by muffled voices coming from the council room. The door cracked open just enough to let me catch the edge of their conversation. Pastor Wilson's voice was low, tinged with concern. "We can't just disregard Eleanor's contributions. She's kept this place alive when it was on the brink." David's voice cut in, sharp and unyielding. "We're grateful, Reverend, but progress demands sacrifice. Susan's voice is the future." There was a pause, then the pastor sighed deeply. "This community is more than numbers and voices. It's about respect, love, and faithfulness." But David was resolute. "I understand, but this decision isn't negotiable." I stepped back, the weight of their words settling around me like a cloak of cold steel. The church I had loved, the family I had served for decades, was turning its back on me. That afternoon, as I sat alone, I allowed myself the luxury of tears, for the loss, the betrayal, and the loneliness that wrapped around my heart. But beneath the sorrow was a flicker of something stronger. Resolve. I traced the pearl brooch at my collar, the cool smoothness grounding me. My voice might be whispered down, but my spirit would not be silenced. The next Sunday dawned with a heavy sky, the clouds thick and low. At the service, I sat in the back, watching as the choir processed in, led by David and Susan, her voice clear and bright, the soloist's robe flowing around her like a banner claiming new territory. My heart ached, but my hands rested calmly on my lap. Timothy sat beside me, a reassuring presence. When the hymn ended, I stood, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. "Excuse me, Pastor Wilson," I began, turning to face the congregation. "May I say a few words?" The room hushed, all eyes upon me. "I have sung in this choir for 40 years, I said. "And just last week, I paid off our church's $500,000 debt." A murmur rippled through the pews. I met David's gaze, steady and unyielding. "I do not seek thanks or applause. I did what I did out of love for this community. But faith means more than money or voices. It's how we treat one another." Pausing, I felt the weight of every gaze, every memory etched into these walls, the baptisms, the weddings, the funerals, the laughter and tears. "I will continue to attend this church. I will continue to pray here. And yes, I will continue to sing, even if only from this pew. Because my voice, like my faith, will not be silenced." I returned to my seat, Timothy's hand warm in mine. Slowly, applause rose, growing until the entire congregation was standing. Everyone but David and Susan. Pastor Wilson stepped forward. "I believe we have much to discuss. But for now, let us sing our opening hymn, led, as always, by Eleanor Jameson." As the chords filled the sanctuary, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The path ahead was uncertain, but my place in this community, this family, was real and unshakable. And sometimes faith demands that we raise our voices, even when the world tries to quiet them. The days after my quiet declaration in the sanctuary felt as if the very air around me had thickened, turning heavy and suffocating. I had expected some discomfort, perhaps whispers behind my back, but nothing could have prepared me for the cold walls closing in like a slow but relentless tide. The sanctuary, once a refuge filled with familiar smiles and warm greetings, had shifted into a place where I was met with silence, averted eyes, and spaces left intentionally empty. I remember walking up the church steps one morning, the crisp autumn air sharp against my cheeks, and feeling the subtle change before I even opened the door. A group of women from the congregation stood outside, chatting softly, as if they had been speaking about me just moments before I arrived. Their laughter cut off abruptly, their smiles fading to polite nods that didn't reach their eyes. I caught a glimpse of Hannah, the woman who had sat beside me every Sunday at the front pew. She gave no greeting, just a quick glance and a slight turn away, her shoulders tightening like she was bracing herself. I swallowed hard, the hollow ache in my chest growing heavier. Inside the church, the pews echoed with an unnatural quiet. People who used to come early and greet me warmly now seemed to disappear when I entered, ducking into pews or whispering behind hymnals. I sat down in my usual spot, clutching my Bible, trying to steady my trembling hands. From the corner of my eye, I saw two men from the church council exchange glances and then quickly look away. The whispered conversation ceased the moment I looked their way. It felt as though I had become invisible, or worse, a shadow cast over a gathering that no longer wanted me there. At choir rehearsal that week, the cold atmosphere thickened. The loft, once buzzing with shared excitement and camaraderie, was now a cage of strained silences. As I entered, there was a noticeable pause. The members exchanged guarded looks. Some greeted me with a quick nod. Others barely acknowledged my presence. I could feel their unease like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. David stood by the conductor's podium, his eyes flicking toward me with a mixture of something I couldn't quite read. Was it guilt? Or calculation? He didn't speak as I approached, the space between us filled with an uncomfortable stillness. When the rehearsal started, his corrections, once gentle, now felt sharply directed at me, as though each note I sang was a test I was destined to fail. During a break, I lingered near the edge of the loft, watching the faces of those I had grown to know. Some avoided me, their eyes darting to the floor or to their sheet music. A few whispered quietly to each other, casting quick glances my way. I wanted to reach out, to tell them I was still Eleanor, that I was still the woman who had sung beside them for decades, who had given her heart to this choir and this church. But instead I stood alone, the distance between us growing wider with every passing moment. One afternoon, I tried to stop by the church office. Even Timothy, my dear grandson, noticed the change. On Sunday morning as we sat together in the pew, he whispered gently, "Grandma, I saw Mrs. Evans turn away when you walked in." I nodded slowly, feeling tears prick at my eyes, but I held them back. I didn't want him to see me break. "We can find a new church, you know," he said softly, his hand squeezing mine. I smiled through the ache. "This is where I belong, Timothy. It's not just a building. It's the memories, the prayers, the people I've loved and lost." But even my words felt fragile, like a whispered prayer in a storm. One evening, after choir rehearsal had ended and the members had filtered out quickly, I stood alone in the loft, letting the silence settle around me. The soft glow of the setting sun filtered through the stained glass windows, casting fractured light across the music stands. I imagined how many voices had filled this space over the years, voices raised in hope, in joy, in sorrow. And now mine felt like a fading echo. I thought about the check I had written, the years of faithful service, the hours spent honing every note. I wondered if any of it mattered anymore. A sudden knock at the door startled me. It was Timothy, his face concerned but steady. "Grandma, you can't let them make you feel invisible," he said softly. "Your voice is part of this church's story." His words warmed the icy silence. I nodded, feeling a flicker of determination ignite within me. But the outside world was relentless. The next Sunday, as I entered the sanctuary, I felt eyes on me, but this time they were filled with judgment rather than warmth. A few members whispered as I passed, their voices low but sharp. "Why is she still here? She should be grateful for what she got." I kept my gaze steady, swallowed the lump in my throat, and took my seat, clutching my Bible as a lifeline. During the service, I caught sight of Susan Mercer sitting prominently in the front row, her posture confident, her smile bright and unapologetic. The red soloist's robe she wore seemed to glow under the sanctuary lights, a symbol not just of a new musical direction, but of a shifting power dynamic that left me on the sidelines. After the service, I hoped for a word from someone, anyone, but the crowd dispersed quickly, their smiles polite but distant. The usual invitations for coffee or conversation were replaced by hurried goodbyes and averted eyes. I found myself lingering near the exit, feeling more alone than ever. The church doors, once welcoming and open, now seemed like barriers closing slowly, shutting me out. I thought of Richard, his reassuring presence now only a memory. What would he say if he could see this? Would he tell me to stand firm, to hold on to my faith even when the world felt cold and cruel? I clasped the pearl brooch at my collar, feeling the smooth, cool surface beneath my fingers, and I whispered a silent prayer for strength. The days grew shorter, the chill of autumn deepening, and with every sunrise, the isolation grew a little heavier. Yet beneath the weight, a quiet resolve was forming, a determination not to be erased, not to fade into silence. Because faith isn't just about the songs we sing, or the buildings we fill. It's about standing tall when the world tries to push us down. And I was not ready to be silenced. The sanctuary was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes every breath feel like a small battle. I stepped up to the pulpit, the polished wood cool beneath my trembling fingers as I steadied myself. The scent of varnished oak and worn leather hit me like a wave, familiar and grounding yet sharp enough to remind me how much was at stake. My heart pounded in my ears, a steady drumbeat that seemed far too loud in the quiet room. I glanced out at the congregation, faces I'd known for decades, etched with surprise, curiosity, even a flicker of discomfort. Some eyes met mine with warmth, others with hesitation, and a few avoided me altogether. The choir loft loomed behind me, and I caught sight of David sitting stiffly at the edge, his green eyes narrowed but unable to look away. Susan was there too, her posture rigid, lips pressed into a thin line, the red soloist's robe draped around her like armor. My hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles white, resting on the smooth surface of the pulpit. I could feel the faint tremble in my fingertips and fought hard to keep my breathing steady, to slow the rush of blood that threatened to flood my mind with panic. My Bible lay open to the side, its pages worn from years of use, but I didn't look down. My voice needed to be steady, clear, honest. The church was quiet enough that the slight rustling of fabric and soft clearing of throats echoed, filling the stillness like ripples over a still pond. I swallowed once, twice, drawing a slow, deep breath. It felt like the very air was charged, each inhale tinged with the weight of every moment that had led me here. "Good morning," I began, my voice low but firm, carrying through the room with a clarity that surprised even me. "Many of you know me as Eleanor Jameson. I have been a part of this church's choir for over 40 years. This choir, this church has been my home, my refuge and my family." I paused, letting the words settle into the room. I could feel the eyes of the congregation on me, some soft and encouraging, others guarded, perhaps uncertain how to respond. "Just last week," I continued, "I was asked to step away from the choir. I was told that my voice, my presence was becoming distracting." I swallowed again, my throat tightening, but I refused to let the tremor show. I won't pretend this was easy to hear. After all these years, after singing my heart out every Sunday, to be told I was no longer needed, it was like a door closing in my face. I took a breath, steadying myself. "But there is something else I must share. Something many of you do not know." I saw a ripple of surprise pass through the crowd. It was I who paid off the church's $500,000 debt last week. Quietly, without fanfare, without asking for recognition. The room stirred, whispers barely audible, but the tension was unmistakable. I caught the quick intake of breath from a few of the elders in the front pews. David's face paled, his jaw tightening. Susan's eyes flicked away, a flash of frustration or perhaps anger crossing her features. "I'm not sharing this to seek thanks or applause," I said, voice gaining strength. "I did this because I love this church, because it has given me hope when I needed it most, because this community has been my family through joy and sorrow." My hands unclasped briefly, resting on the pulpit as I leaned forward, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my fingers. The scent was earthy, warm, a reminder of the countless sermons, prayers, and hymns that had filled this sanctuary over the years. "But faith," I said quietly, "faith is more than money or voices or traditions. Faith is how we treat one another. It's the compassion we show when no one is watching, and the courage we have when everyone is." A silence followed, thick and pregnant, as if the very walls were holding their breath alongside me. "I will continue to come here," I said, voice unyielding now. "I will continue to pray. And yes, I will keep singing, even if it's only from this pew. Because my voice, like my faith, cannot be silenced." The words hung in the air, a fragile yet fierce declaration. For a moment, all I could hear was the echo of my own voice bouncing softly against the high ceilings, mingling with the faint creak of the wooden pews and the distant murmur of the organ resting quietly off to the side. Timothy's hand found mine beneath the pew, warm and steady, grounding me in a sea of uncertainty. Then slowly a single clap broke the silence. Another followed, and soon the entire congregation was standing, their applause filling the sanctuary like a wave of affirmation and solidarity. Everyone except David and Susan. Their silence was as loud as thunder. Pastor Wilson stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute as he addressed the gathering. "I believe we have much to discuss as a congregation," he said. "But first, let us sing our opening hymn, 'Led as It Has Been for Decades' by Eleanor Jameson." As I made my way back to the choir loft, the sound of the congregation's voices rising in song, a sense of quiet victory settled over me. Passing David and Susan, I felt their eyes on my back, but I held my head high, because I had learned that day what Richard always told me, that true faith isn't just about words spoken in private. Sometimes it's about the strength to raise your voice when everyone is watching. And I would never be silenced. The church was nearly empty when I arrived that morning, yet, despite the ache in my chest, there was a flicker of something inside me. A spark of defiance, of resilience. I thought of Richard, his steady voice, the way he always reminded me that faith was not just in words or songs, but in actions. The way he held my hand in moments of doubt and reminded me that courage was sometimes quiet, sometimes loud, but always necessary. I glanced over at Timothy sitting beside me, his young hand warm in mine. His eyes, so like my husband's, were steady and filled with a quiet strength that buoyed my own. "Grandma," he whispered, "whatever happens, I'm proud of you." His words were a balm to my soul. The murmurs of the congregation began to stir as more people arrived, their voices hushed, their eyes flickering toward me with a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. I could feel the weight of their gazes like 1,000 silent questions hanging in the air. But I was ready to speak not just for myself, but for every quiet voice that had ever felt ignored or undervalued. When the organ began to play, a hush fell over the room. The choir processed in, led by David and Susan. Susan wore the soloist's robe I had once worn, the deep crimson fabric a stark reminder of the space I was told to leave. David's eyes met mine briefly, cold and unreadable, before flicking away. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. When the moment came, I rose from my seat, my heart pounding but my voice clear and strong. "Excuse me, Reverend Wilson," I said, turning toward the pulpit. "May I say a few words?" There was a pause, the entire sanctuary holding its breath. The Reverend gave a slight nod, his expression one of surprise mixed with quiet support. I faced the congregation, meeting eyes that belonged to friends, neighbors, and family. My voice carried, unshaken. For over 40 years I have sung in this choir. This church has been my home, a place where I have found solace and community through life's trials and joys. Last night I was told that my voice is no longer needed. It is a distraction. That I should step aside for new faces, new voices. My words trembled briefly, but I held steady. Yet, many of you do not know that I was the one who paid off our church's $500,000 debt last week. Quietly, without fanfare, without seeking recognition. A ripple went through the crowd. I could see some faces soften, others stiffen. David's color drained, his jaw tightening. Susan's composure flickered. And I sensed a tension between them that had nothing to do with music. "I do not speak of this for thanks," I continued, "but to remind us all that faith is more than money. It is more than voices or appearances. Faith is compassion. It is kindness. It is the courage to stand firm in what is right, even when it means standing alone." The room was silent, the air thick with emotion and unspoken truths. I looked directly at David, my voice unwavering. "I will continue to attend this church. I will continue to pray here. And yes, I will continue to sing, even if it is only from this pew. Because my voice, like my faith, cannot be silenced." Slowly, a single hand clap, tentative then sure. Another followed. Then another. The applause grew, filling the sanctuary with warmth and affirmation. The congregation rose, standing in solidarity, their faces shining with a mixture of respect, love, and perhaps a quiet reckoning. Everyone stood except David and Susan. Their silence was a sharp, jagged contrast to the outpouring of support around me. Pastor Wilson stepped forward, his voice steady and full of gravity. "I believe we have much to discuss as a congregation," he said. "But first, let us sing our opening hymn, led, as it has been for decades, by Eleanor Jameson." As I made my way back to the choir loft, passing between David and Susan, I felt their eyes on me, watchful, calculating. But I held my head high. I could feel a quiet peace settling over me, a sense of dignity reclaimed. In that moment I understood something Richard always knew. Faith is not just what you whisper in prayer. It is what you choose to show the world when it watches. And sometimes the truest courage is found in raising your voice, even when the world tries to silence you. I sat down, the notes of the hymn rising around me, and I sang, deep in my heart and soul, because some voices, some spirits are meant never to be silenced. The sanctuary was empty now, bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows. The colors spilled like gentle tears across the wooden floor, painting the cold pews in hues of crimson, gold, and sapphire. It was quiet, a silence so profound that it seemed to hold its breath, waiting for something that had already passed. I sat alone on the last pew, the worn leather of my mother's Bible resting heavy in my lap. My fingers traced the faded edges of its cover, the smoothness worn soft from years of prayer, comfort, and hope. The pew creaked softly beneath me as I shifted, the sound echoing through the stillness like a whisper from the past. Outside, I could hear the faint rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle autumn breeze. The wind carried with it the scent of earth and wood smoke, a reminder of the world moving on beyond these sacred walls. The door at the church's entrance stood slightly ajar, swaying slowly as the breeze nudged it, before finally closing with a soft click that sounded like a final sigh. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, my chest rising and falling with a bittersweet ache. The weight of the last weeks pressed upon me, heavy like a stone sinking deep into the quiet waters of my soul. The silence around me was not only the absence of voices, it was the space where so many memories and moments had once lived, now folded neatly away like pages in a book closing softly. The empty choir loft above seemed to hold its own kind of stillness. I imagined the worn music stands, the scattered sheets of hymns, the empty seats where so many voices had risen in harmony over the years. I pictured the faces of the choir members I had known and loved, their laughter and smiles now distant echoes. And yet, in that silence, I found a strange kind of peace. I thought of David and Susan, of the cold calculation that had pushed me aside, and the weight of their silence as the congregation stood in my defense. Their refusal to join the applause was a cold reminder that not all battles are won with cheers. But even in that absence I felt a quiet victory. The victory of a voice reclaimed, a spirit unbroken. My grandson Timothy's hand rested lightly on mine beside me. His presence was a warm anchor in the solitude, reminding me that love had not deserted me, even if some in this church had turned away. I looked at him, his bright eyes reflecting a future still waiting to be written, and I felt the strength of generations, the past I carried, the hope he embodied. Slowly I rose from the pew, the Bible held close to my heart. The church was a place of beginnings and endings, of faith tested and renewed. I took a few steps toward the exit, the wooden floor cool beneath my feet, the sanctuary holding its quiet vigil. As I reached the door, the wind caught it again, swinging it open for a moment, then closing it softly behind me. The echo of my footsteps faded down the stone pathway, carried away on the autumn breeze. I paused at the threshold, looking back one last time. The sunlight danced through the glass, the colors shifting with the passing clouds. The church was still standing, a beacon of hope and history, of prayers whispered and songs lifted on the air. And though the voices within might change, the walls would remember every note ever sung. Every joy, every sorrow, every promise kept, and every truth spoken. I stepped into the cool embrace of the afternoon, the leaves crunching softly underfoot. The road ahead was uncertain, the horizon wide and open. But my heart was steady, my voice unshaken. Because faith, I had learned, was not just about belonging. It was about standing tall when storms passed through, about holding on to light when shadows lengthened. It was the courage to sing your truth, even when the choir falls silent. And so, with the crisp wind at my back and the sun warming my face, I walked forward. The church doors closed behind me, but my song, my faith, would carry on. A new chapter was beginning, and I would be ready to sing. The sun had begun its slow descent behind the oaks surrounding the church, casting long soft shadows that stretched across the worn stone steps. The air was crisp with the early bite of autumn, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. I sat quietly on the last pew, the worn leather cover of my mother's Bible resting against my hands, grounding me in a world that felt both familiar and yet, in the stillness I realized that this wasn't about my voice or even about music at all. It was about who we choose to value, who we allow to belong, and the quiet battles fought behind closed doors in places meant to be sanctuaries. My grandson, Timothy, sat beside me, his young hand warm in mine. His steady presence was a reminder that faith was not just about tradition, but about the courage to stand firm, even when standing alone. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice soft, "your voice is part of this church's heart." I smiled, tears threatening to spill but held back by a resolve forged in years of love and loss. The church doors creaked open, a gentle breeze fluttering the pages of hymnals left on the pews. It was a moment of stillness, a breath held in time. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future mingling within me. This church was not simply a place where voices rose together in harmony. It was a place where every voice, no matter how quiet, no matter how silenced, belonged. And sometimes the truest song we can sing is the one that refuses to be silenced. If you've made it this far, thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. If you feel it in your heart, please subscribe so you won't miss the next stories, and keep walking with me by watching the other videos I've prepared with care. And please, share in the comments what you thought of my testimony. I will read every word.